Hello, everybody. Welcome yet again to another edition of 18 Minutes with 180 Markets, where we are trying to bring you incredibly interesting people that can help you make money. You know, one of the key themes we always discuss on is that you must be on a key theme. And one of the key themes in the world in the last 10, 20 years is health and wellness. A little known fact, did you know that prior to World War II, life expectancy for thousands of years was about 45 years old? In other words, in the last 100 years, life expectancy has doubled. And one of the reasons for that is our incredible changes in step change of medical technology. And with us today, we have one of the companies, Adalta, and Tim Oldham, the managing director, to talk to us about how they are making people's lives better by seeking a cure for pulmonary fibrosis and even more. With that introduction, Tim, welcome to 18 Minutes with 180 Markets.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you for having me.
Tim, everybody always wants to know people's backgrounds, but certainly when it comes to health, biotech, wellness, it's even more important. Can you just discuss with us your background, please?
Sure. I guess always been interested in science and the applications of science since I was a young bloke growing up on a farm in central New South Wales. And I studied science at university really around the time where biotechnology was starting to make real inroads and changes to the world, around about the same time that the first biological drugs or antibody drugs were approved. And this was something that I realized was going to make a fundamental difference to the way we live our lives and the way healthcare is delivered. And so really what I was interested in was not so much the development of the technologies per se, because discoveries are no use unless you make them real and into products that you can bring to patients. So I've always been interested in the growth of products and companies out of that. So after many years as a student and a researcher, I joined McKinsey & Company to learn how to think about businesses, did the management consulting tour of duty, and then I joined the pharma industry where I've been for the last 20 years or so, and all focused on building new businesses within large companies and then small companies. So I started at Main Pharmaceuticals, the old Folding Pharmaceuticals, spent a big chunk of time over there in Europe, was involved in the first establishment of a biosimilars marketplace. So this was the first generics of those biologic drugs that just hit the market back when I was growing up. Then moved on to run Asia Pacific for Hospira, which was a US-based injectable generic company, and spent a lot of time in Japan, Korea, and China. Again, building new market entries and really understanding the huge opportunity we have in Asia. Came back and spent some time in Australia as the CEO of a cell and gene therapy contract manufacturing company called Cell Therapies, which is a subsidiary of the Peter Mac Cancer Hospital here. And they're on the front line of actually manufacturing some of the really breakthrough cellular immunotherapy products in the world, and now the local manufacturing site for Novartis's CAR-T program, which is a total another topic we won't get too far on today. But through all of that, I've always been on the lookout for technologies that have the potential to have a significant impact, a significant change, to change the way we think about developing products for healthcare. And so when the opportunity at Adalta came up, it was in some respects, it was a no-brainer for me. I wasn't interested in becoming and joining a single product company. And what I saw in Adalta was this company with an amazing technology platform called iBodies, which can do things that traditional antibodies can't. It's got the first product that's coming off that platform. At the time, was about to enter the clinic. We're now in the clinic with that first asset, and that's a really important asset for pulmonary fibrosis. We had a collaboration with GE Healthcare, which commercially validates the platform. So we've got this great platform. We've got this product that's clinically validating it. We've got this deal that's commercially validating it. And now we can grow it by adding more and more products and assets on the top of it. So it really does have that opportunity to hit all those impact buttons I hope for. And at the same time, hopefully build a sustainable Aussie biotech that has a life beyond its first product.
I'm always honestly humbled by people who have done what you've done already. But to get into your business specifically, can you just talk firstly maybe about how does a platform different than, say, a single product company? And then maybe we'll get into the pulmonary fibrosis afterwards, if that's okay with you.
Sure. So your single product company is a company that's typically discovered a molecule that appears to be active in a disease, and their sole focus is developing that molecule. And at the end of the day, they will either commercialize that molecule or they'll sell it to another company or license it to another company. They then may go and find another molecule and develop that molecule as another product. A platform company, on the other hand, has a technology that enables you to be more efficient at discovering those active molecules in the first place.
Right.
And so your underlying technology is your core asset, and that enables you to repeat the process over and over again without having to go back to that sort of basic discovery of molecule plus target equals disease candidate. And we're not the first company to have a drug discovery platform. There are many of those. What's unique about our iBody platform is it's got a very unique structure. We actually model it on the shark immune system. You can imagine going back and doing the basic research on that on wobbegong sharks in the coast around Australia. We've now humanized that, and we'll do it in the lab now. But essentially, the structure of that iBody means that we have a unique way of hitting biological targets that are implicated in disease in ways that are not possible with other structures and with other antibody platforms. And as a result of that, we can develop not just our first product, which we call AD214, against a particular receptor, which is called CXCR4. But in essence, there's a whole family of receptors. We focus on a class called G protein coupled receptors. There are over 400 of these. So far, we've only drugged about 25% of them, yet they're the most important drug class within the pharmaceutical industry. And the reason they're so important is because they're involved in so many diseases, and we're not very good at hitting them. And so we found a way that has a different approach that increases the probability that we can develop a drug that's going to be active against these targets specifically and selectively, and repeat over and over again.
Right.
Now, the importance of the platform company is you've got to be able to demonstrate that it works once, and that's why the lead product is so important.
And that's what I was just going to ask you about. So pulmonary fibrosis is more of the first product or the first area you're attacking with your platform. Is that the way that people should understand your business?
Correct. And we will develop,
okay,
our focus area for our internal pipeline will be other drugs in that same sort of area, fibrosis, inflammation, and there's also implications in oncology or cancer as well. So we've got a very clear focus around these complicated G protein coupled receptors and those three disease areas, fibrosis, inflammation, and oncology.
Excellent.
But we can also partner the platform with other pharmaceutical companies, which is what we've done with GE. And they have a target of interest in a totally different area. And we're working to discover iBodies against their target, which they will then go on and commercialize themselves, and we earn milestones and royalties down the track if they're successful. So the platform can be applied in many, many areas. We focus it on those couple of areas for our internal pipeline purposes, but we have this whole external pipeline potential as well. So more GE-like deals in the future.
Right. Fantastic. And also, can you just tell us, because there's been some very positive news coming out of the U.S. with FDA phase 1 for the pulmonary fibrosis product, I believe. Can you just describe to the audience what that means from your point of view?
So you're referring to our own product?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Adalta's been around for 12 years, and we finally got our first product into clinical trials. Those trials are happening in Australia. They're a phase 1 trial program. But ultimately, we'll be developing this drug for the global markets. So in order to get the trial started in Australia, we had to do an enormous amount of preclinical discovery and development work, obviously. We then had to get approval from an ethics committee here in Australia to say, yes, this drug is now safe to go into patients. So that was the first time our total data package had been reviewed by someone independently.
Okay.
But because we're developing the drug for global markets, it's also really important that we stay in step with the expectations of the regulatory authorities in other markets. And the biggest market is the US, and the regulator there is the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. So in the process of getting our product approved for clinical trials in Australia, we also sought the guidance of the FDA in what's called a pre-IND meeting. And an IND is your application to the FDA to do clinical trials in the US. So we went and asked them and said, look, this is what we're going to do in Australia. Would this be good enough for the US? So it's not an approval from the FDA. I want to emphasize that we do not have approval to start a clinical trial in the US, nor do we need it right now. But what the FDA has told us is that the complete package of data that we have in our preclinical package is suitable for an IND application. And our clinical trial design that we're running is something that they would accept. They think it's reasonable. Importantly, they also gave us a few pointers along the way around some details they wanted to see, and we've been able to incorporate those into the local clinical trial design and our ongoing preclinical development program, so that when we do eventually go to the FDA, we'll have ticked all the boxes that they want. But they've been supportive of us so far, which is really, really important and encouraging, because it means we'll be able to take the data that we have and the package we have and the package we're generating from the phase 1 programs here to the FDA with very, very high confidence that it will be acceptable to them.
Right. That's great, because I think that people don't quite understand always or appreciate just how long and how expensive it is to get a drug from literally step 1 to the market. Would you say it could be a 10-year process potentially?
It can be a 10-year process. It can be a longer process. It can be a shorter process. And part of the art is around how do you choose targets that have efficient clinical trials, particularly as a small company seeking to validate the platform. So, yeah, we've been developing, as I mentioned, Adalta was founded in 2007. So we've been around for 12, 13 years. And we've got our first product into the clinic now. Now, it was 3 or 4 years before we identified CXCR4 as our target. There was 3 or 4 years worth of preclinical work on an initial format of the drug. And then we changed the format and we modified we kept the same eye-body binding component, but we added different pieces onto the back end of it to produce a longer half-life and an easier to manufacture product. And that's what we now call AD214. So that process took another 18 months to 2 years additional time than normal. Our phase 1 study program will run for about 18 months potentially. In IPF, so it's idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which is our initial target, we will need to follow patients in our phase 2 and phase 3 studies for a minimum of 6 months in all likelihood. Maybe 3 months in phase 2, but minimum of 6 months. So each patient in that trial is going to be 6 months. But we're going to need lots of patients, so that takes more and more time. So you're looking at another couple of year program there, and then your big phase 3 studies for approval is another couple of years. So the clinical studies themselves can take 6, 7, 8 years sometimes. It is a long and expensive process. However, for a company like us, we won't be following it all the way through. We'll be looking to unlock the value of that product earlier than that, because there's a natural process of biotech companies like us handing off the products to large pharmaceutical companies who can fund the more expensive later stage clinical trials and then the commercialization. And so we expect to start realizing licensing deals for AD214 much earlier than the product is finally approved by the FDA. And we'll earn milestones and royalty payments along the way as a result of those deals.
Right, because obviously in your background in medicine and pharma, you know very well that it's all well and good to have a drug, but if you don't have any type of distribution or funding for it or pushing the product out there, it's almost meaningless, so to speak. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why we are talking to those potential big pharma partners now, because on the one hand, we're talking to the regulators about what they expect to get a drug approved into clinical trials and then on to the next stage. But we're also talking to the pharma companies about what they want to see in order to evaluate the commercial potential.
Right. And are they also very interested in the fact that you have a platform, because maybe they have another drug or another product that would fit in with what you're doing already?
So we have 2 different kinds of partnering conversations going on at any one time. All right. So we have conversations with companies who are looking to add new antifibrotic molecules into their pipeline. And they're the type of companies that will take a license to AD214 as a product. And our aim with those types of discussions is that we have 2 or 3 really interested in the product about the time our phase 1 data reads out towards the end of next year. And essentially what we're trying to do is create some degree of competitive tension in a transaction around that time. The other type of partnership that we look at is partnering the platform, as we've done with GE. And by that, what we're doing is saying, okay, company X, GE, to use that example, that's a real live example, you've got a target that you're interested in developing a drug or a diagnostic to. We provide the tools to enable you to find the drug that will bind that target with the pharmacological and biological effects that you're looking for.
Right.
And so that, in that sense, we're back at that sort of early discovery stage, and we're helping them build their own internal pipeline. And those sorts of deals, we can do at any time, and our objective is to have more GE deals. We're having different sets of conversations with different companies. They're a broader distribution of companies, from smaller biotechs all the way through to big pharma companies, but all of whom have either a target or some other drug delivery type technology, and they need the piece of the puzzle that engages the target with the specificity and selectivity that our antibodies can do. And so we say to those companies, bring us your most challenging drug discovery problems, and our antibody platform is designed to solve that. If your target is easy to hit, go use traditional techniques because they're faster and easier and more established. But if you're having any kind of trouble and you can't get the selectivity and the specificity that you need, that's when you need to come and talk to us.
Incredible. I think it's clear that medicine is a long road, but for people, what should they be looking for? Obviously, we can't wait years and years and years to get some type of news flow. In your mind, what should investors be looking for from Adalta, over the next, call it 12 months?
Yeah. So there are, I guess, 2 ways to look at the value of a biotech company like Adalta. The first one is, what assets have we got in the portfolio that we're actively developing? And as of today, we have an asset in the iBody platform, which is capable of spitting off more product-specific assets. We have an asset in AD214, and we have an asset in the products that will emerge from the GE collaboration. Right. So the first thing is, how many assets have you got in the platform, in the portfolio? And the thing to look for is, how are we building that number of assets?
Right.
The second thing to look at is, for the assets that are in the portfolio, how are we adding value to those? And that means progressing them through development and reducing the risk associated with them.
Right.
So if I look at what assets we might add to the portfolio over the next 12 months, we're hoping that we're aiming to identify the next 2 targets that we're going to add into internal development. So what are the next 2 AD214 we're going to develop? Right. And I would hope that in the next 12 months, we would also have another partnership with a GE-like company. Right. So new assets will come from new molecules that we've confirmed as targets, or new targets that we're confirmed as that we want to develop products to, and new partnerships like GE. In terms of de-risking and adding value to the assets we have in our existing portfolio, this is going to be all about AD214. Right. The phase 1 program, it overall runs for 18 months, but it's divided into 3 parts. The first part is in healthy volunteers, and that's recruiting right now in Adelaide. And that will take till the end of the year, and there'll be top-line safety data emerging from that study in January next year. So that'll be a big milestone, because we'll start to see the half-life of the drug, how long it remains in circulation. We'll start to see how long it engages the CXCR4 receptor in healthy volunteers, and we'll have a safety profile of the drug, which are important to then moving on. And we'll have some interim data, probably around halfway through. We'll be able to communicate how that's progressing through the various dose levels. So they're the immediate ones on AD214, and then in the second half of next year, we'll start the patient cohorts in phase 1. So many phase 1 studies only get conducted in healthy volunteers, which gives you so much information. But in our case, the CXCR4 receptor that we're interested in, has a much larger expression, or there's much more of it in patients with pulmonary fibrosis. In fact, it's a marker of disease. And in fact, in the lungs of healthy volunteers, there is no overexpression of, there's no material expression of CXCR4. So by moving into patients, we're starting to see how does that distribution of the target change in patients, and what effect does that have on the drug? And we're developing a radio-labeled version of AD214 that allows us to use a thing called PET imaging, which is a sophisticated diagnostic imaging technique. Basically, it lets us track where the AD214 goes within the patient's body and how long it stays there in a way that we couldn't possibly do just by observing the circulating blood. And that's the importance of that phase 1 patient cohort that we start in the second half of next year. So starting that will be a big deal. And that first couple of PET images that come from the patients we treat in that segment is going to be really important for adding value to our partnering discussions. So that's the big one early next year. And later this year, you'll see the preclinical data coming out on the development of that PET tracer version of AD214. Amazing. So lots going on in the next 12 months that'll show significant progress towards a safe drug that has an appropriate half-life and distribution to address this difficult disease in patients.
Right, and also obviously along the way you need to fund that, all those results and trials and so forth. How is the balance sheet at this point in time?
So we have $3.4 million in the bank as at the 30th of June.
Right.
That's sufficient to fund us through the end of that healthy volunteer component of the phase 1 study. Obviously, as a biotech company, we have limited revenue and lots of expenses right now. So we're not promising that we will be cash positive with existing cash in the bank.
Biotech 101.
Right. We can run through until the end of that healthy volunteer part of the phase 1 study if we need to. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd like to have the flexibility to implement the strategic growth plan we've laid out and start adding those extra assets into the portfolio. That needs additional funding, and so we're looking actively at the moment as to when's the optimal time to implement that part of the strategy.
Right. Tim, in closing, thank you very much for your time. Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with, though? I mean, to me, the big thing is that it's a platform, not a single drug, if you will, but is there something else you'd like to add?
Well, I think the other thing is we've talked a lot about the platform. I mean, I've maybe underemphasized just how important AD214 is as a drug in its own right. Pulmonary fibrosis is a debilitating disease. There is no cure. It's a degenerative disease. The median life expectancy after diagnosis is less than 4 years. There are 2 marketed drugs available today. They don't work particularly well, and they've got some particularly nasty side effects. And yet they still generate $3 billion of sales a year. So this is a hugely important market for us and for the industry as a whole to solve. And it's only going to get worse as a result of COVID-19, because we know that patients who recover from COVID-19 and acute respiratory distress syndromes will end up with some sort of fibrotic complication long-term in their lungs. And so this is really encouraging us to double down very, very hard on AD214 and really make sure we give it the best possible shot of getting a new treatment available to these patients.
Tim, I hope that you're right. We're following your story and wish you all the best of success.
Thanks, Greg. It's been great to be here.
Bye-bye.